values which you bring into the position of the judge. It's true that must be so, and the force of the logic of that, of course, is what sustains that argument. But at the risk of letting the cat out of the bag, it's a lot less important in practice than you might think, especially in our jurisdiction, because although it can be fair to say that some judges consciously search for a just outcome, whatever that might be in one or another's view, and some judges are indifferent and just let the cards stay where they fall, because of our constitutional regime, the band of the spectrum between what's fair and unfair in our context is very narrow. It might have been different before 1994, but in a constitutional system that has dignity and equality and fairness as its leitmotif, there's very little room to move away from that. And so individual values don't really play a large part in decision making. In practice, the differences between judges are far more banal and more common sense. And when we start asking seriously how judges decide, that is a function of two aspects of the work process. And a lot of what I've got to say tonight focuses on the work process rather than some highfalutin theory about how officers of the court reach up to the sky for grand principles. And when we consider that, the first thing we've got to bear in mind, it has major influence on how judges decide, on the working conditions, and the types of cases which they hear. Because I'm going to deal a little later on with the various kinds of courts we have and the types of cases they do, and indicate why decision-making varies and why advocacy skills vary in relation to those matters. So that's the one thing, working conditions. The second thing that explains why judges decide the way they do is the particular techniques that they employ to do the work itself. And whatever the variabilities, because if we think about Johannesburg, there are 38 permanent judges. We've got 38 individuals who have all developed a way of doing their work, which to a large extent is something they've worked out to suit themselves. And it's not as if we get together and we work out a systematic way of doing it. We're not rowers where we have to row in unison. Everybody's got their own ideas about how things ought to be done. But ultimately, it breaks down into two categories of technique. The one is linear, and the other is analytic. And that applies to all kinds of thinking. If you are of a linear cast of mind, you're the sort of person who starts the story at the beginning. The coffee was cold, you move on to the fact that the door was stuck when you left out of it, and you plod your way down the driveway and onto your day. That kind of narrative way of thinking is what many people throughout the entire world use in order to navigate their reality. Analytic thinking is an acquired habit, and that second way of looking at things is very, very different. And in my experience, most judges in South Africa use an analytic approach to their work. It's true, you can read the judgments from various judges and from magistrates, and you can, after seeing one or two judgments from the same person, see whether or not they are of an analytic or of a linear mindset. And that, as part of your advocacy skills in learning to know your bench, is important to know when you construct your own arguments. But by and large, most of us are analytic. And what I'm going to be offering is a theory of decision-making, which I call the deconstruction and construction model of judicial decision-making. Very fancy title. It took me all of 30 seconds to think of it. And it is the watchword that I'm going to come back to in explaining how I think you can understand why these decisions are made in the way they are. But first, let's look at working conditions, and I'm here looking specifically at Gauteng. Decision making is not a separate process from the preparation of a matter and the hearing of a matter. It happens in one almost seamless process. This continuum takes into account a number of things over which the judge has no control. Number one, there's a continual flood of matters which come in. So every judge has got to work out a work program that suits him or her as to how to get through the work. In Gauteng, no judge can get through the work that's assigned without working routinely during the evenings and over the weekends. Not a great deal of difference from practice. My own experience of moving from practice to the bench is that my work hours didn't change materially. I was able to work more efficiently and I wasted less time simply because of the way the work is organized. One thing I really appreciated when I left practice to the bench is that I no longer had to experience the call from an attorney on a Monday to say that there was a matter that needed to be addressed urgently and the papers would come in the morning. And on Tuesday the papers had not come. And on Wednesday the papers had not come. And eventually the papers came at 4 o'clock on Friday, which meant that there was no choice about having to work the weekend on them. That went out of the window. It was one of the most refreshing changes I had. Now the work comes on Monday, and the only time to do it is on the weekend. So you must expect from the human beings who start the bench to be people who are working 50 hours a week plus. And it's not different from the kind of strains that you'll be under yourself if you're busy. And that has got to be something that you take into account when you understand what you're working with. So to pick up on that point and move onwards, what does a judge care about